Simone de Beauvoir, published January the 28th, 2018. Further information can be found at the end of this recording. Simone Lucie Ernestine Marie Bertrand de Beauvoir, in French, Simone de Beauvoir. The 9th of January 1908 to 14 April 1986, was a French writer, intellectual, existentialist philosopher, political activist, feminist and social theorist. Though she did not consider herself a philosopher, she had a significant influence on both feminist existentialism and feminist theory. De Beauvoir wrote novels, essays, biographies, autobiography and monographs on philosophy, politics and social issues. She was known for her 1949 treatise, The Second Sex, a detailed analysis of women's oppression and a foundational tract of contemporary feminism, and for her novels, including She Came to Stay and The Mandarins. She was also known for her lifelong open relationship with French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. Part 1, Early Years. Part 1, Early Years. Chapter 1, Family. Simone de Beauvoir was born in Paris on the 9th of January, 1908. Her parents were Georges Bertrand de Beauvoir, a legal secretary who once aspired to be an actor, and Françoise de Beauvoir, née Brasseur, a wealthy banker's daughter and devout Catholic. Simone's sister, Helene, was born 2 years later. The family struggled to maintain their bourgeois status after losing much of their fortune shortly after World War I, and Françoise insisted that the two daughters be sent to a prestigious convent school. De Beauvoir herself was deeply religious as a child, at one point intending to become a nun. She lost her faith in her mid-teens and remained an atheist for the rest of her life. Part 1, Early Years. Chapter 2, Education. De Beauvoir was intellectually precocious, fueled by her father's encouragement. He reportedly would boast, "Simone thinks like a man." Because of her family's straitened circumstances, de Beauvoir could no longer rely on her dowry, and like other middle-class girls of her age, her marriage opportunities were put at risk. De Beauvoir took this opportunity to do what she always wanted to do while also taking steps to earn a living for herself. After passing baccalaureate exams in mathematics and philosophy in 1925, she studied mathematics at the Institut Catholique de Paris and literature/languages at the Institut Sainte-Marie. She then studied philosophy at the Sorbonne, and after completing her degree in 1928, she wrote her Diplôme d'études supérieures, roughly equivalent to an MA thesis, on Leibniz for Leon Brunswick. The topic was Le concept chez Leibniz, the concept in Leibniz. De Beauvoir was only the 9th woman to have received a degree from the Sorbonne at the time, due to the fact that French women had only recently been allowed to join higher education. De Beauvoir first worked with Maurice Merleau-Ponty and Claude Lévi-Strauss, when all three completed their practice teaching requirements at the same secondary school. Although not officially enrolled, she sat in on courses at the École Normale Supérieure in preparation for the agrégation in philosophy, a highly competitive postgraduate examination which serves as a national ranking of students. It was while studying for the agrégation that she met École Normale students Jean-Paul Sartre, Paul Nizan, and René Maheu, who gave her the lasting nickname Castor or Beaver. The jury for the agrégation narrowly awarded Sartre first place instead of de Beauvoir, who placed second and, at age 21, was the youngest person ever to pass the exam. Writing of her youth in Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter, she said, "My father's individualism and pagan ethical standards were in complete contrast to the rigidly moral conventionalism of my mother's teaching. This disequilibrium, which made my life a kind of endless disputation, is the main reason why I became an intellectual." Part 2. Middle years. From 1929 to 1943, de Beauvoir taught at the lycée level until she could support herself solely on the earnings of her writings. She taught at the Lycée Montgrand, Marseille, the Lycée Jeanne d'Arc, Rouen, the Lycée Molière, Paris, 1936 to 39. During October 1929, Jean-Paul Sartre and de Beauvoir became a couple, and, after they were confronted by her father, Sartre asked her to marry him. One day while they were sitting on a bench outside the Louvre, he said, "Let's sign a 2-year lease." Near the end of her life, de Beauvoir said, "Marriage was impossible. I had no dowry." So they entered a lifelong relationship. Sartre and de Beauvoir always read each other's work. Debate continues about the extent to which they influenced each other in their existentialist works, such as Sartre's Being and Nothingness and de Beauvoir's She Came to Stay and Phenomenology and Intent. However, recent studies of de Beauvoir's work focus on influences other than Sartre, including Hegel and Leibniz. The neo-Hegelian revival led by Alexander Kojève and Jean Hyppolite in the 1930s inspired a whole generation of French thinkers, including Beauvoir and Sartre, to discover Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. Part 3. Personal Life. Beginning in 1929, de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre were partners for 51 years until his death in 1980. De Beauvoir chose never to marry or set up a joint household, and she never had children. This gave her the time to advance her education and engage in political causes, to write and teach, and to have lovers. Perhaps her most famous lover was American author Nelson Algren, whom she met in Chicago in 1947, and to whom she wrote across the Atlantic as "My Beloved Husband." Algren won the National Book Award for The Man with the Golden Arm in 1950, and in 1954, de Beauvoir won France's most prestigious literary prize for The Mandarins, in which Algren is the character Louis Brogan. Algren vociferously objected to their intimacy becoming public. Years after they separated, she was buried wearing his gift of a sliver ring. However, she lived with Claude Lanzmann from 1952 to 1959. De Beauvoir was bisexual, and her relationships with young women were controversial. Former student Bianca Lamblin, originally Bianca Bienenfeld, wrote in her book Memoirs d'une fille d'Orange, English, Memoirs of a Disturbed Young Lady, that, while she was a student at Lycée Molière, she had been sexually exploited by her teacher de Beauvoir, who was in her 30s at the time. In 1943, de Beauvoir was suspended from her teaching job due to an accusation that she had seduced her 17-year-old lycée pupil Nathalie Sorokin in 1939. Sorokin's parents laid formal charges against de Beauvoir for debauching a minor, and as a result she had her license to teach in France permanently revoked. In 1977, de Beauvoir, Sartre, Roland Barthes, Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida and much of the era's intelligentsia signed a petition seeking to abrogate the age of consent in France. Part 4. Notable Works. Part 4. Notable Works. Chapter 1. She Came to Stay. De Beauvoir published her first novel, She Came to Stay, in 1943. It is a fictionalized chronicle of her and Sartre's sexual relationship with Olga Kosakovich and Wanda Kosakovich. Olga was one of her students in the Rouen Secondary School where de Beauvoir taught during the early 1930s. She grew fond of Olga. Sartre tried to pursue Olga, but she rejected him, so he began a relationship with her sister Wanda. Upon his death, Sartre was still supporting Wanda. He also supported Olga for years, until she met and married Jacques-Laurent Bost, a lover of de Beauvoir. In the novel, set just before the outbreak of World War II, de Beauvoir creates one character from the complex relationships of Olga and Wanda. The fictionalized versions of Beauvoir and Sartre have a menage a trois with the young woman. The novel also delves into de Beauvoir and Sartre's complex relationship and how it was affected by the menage a trois. She Came to Stay was followed by many others, including The Blood of Others, which explores the nature of individual responsibility, telling a love story between two young French students participating in the resistance in World War II. Part 4, Notable Works. Chapter 2, Existentialist Ethics. In 1944, de Beauvoir wrote her first philosophical essay, Pyrrhus Aeschines, a discussion of an existentialist ethics. She continued her exploration of existentialism through her second essay, The Ethics of Ambiguity, 1947. It is perhaps the most accessible entry into French existentialism. In the essay, de Beauvoir clears up some inconsistencies that many, Sartre included, have found in major existentialist works such as Being and Nothingness. In The Ethics of Ambiguity, de Beauvoir confronts the existentialist dilemma of absolute freedom versus the constraints of circumstance. Part 4, Notable Works. Chapter 3, Les Temps Modernes. At the end of World War II, de Beauvoir and Sartre edited Les Temps Modernes, a political journal which Sartre founded along with Maurice Merleau-Ponty and others. De Beauvoir used Les Temps Modernes to promote her own work and explore her ideas on a small scale before fashioning essays and books. De Beauvoir remained an editor until her death. Part 4, Notable Works. Chapter 4, Sexuality, Existentialist Feminism and the Second Sex. The Second Sex, first published in French as Le Deuxième Sexe, turns the existentialist mantra that existence precedes essence into a feminist one. One is not born but becomes a woman. With this famous phrase, Beauvoir first articulated what has come to be known as the sex-gender distinction, that is, the distinction between biological sex and the social and historical construction of gender and its attendant stereotypes. The fundamental source of women's oppression, Beauvoir notes, is its historical and social construction as the quintessential other. De Beauvoir defines women as the second sex, because women are defined in relation to men. Aristotle referred that women are female by virtue of a certain lack of qualities. De Beauvoir also points out that St. Thomas referred to the woman as the imperfect man, the incidental being. De Beauvoir asserted that women are as capable of choice as men, and thus can choose to elevate themselves, moving beyond the immanence to which they were previously resigned and reaching transcendence, a position in which one takes responsibility for oneself and the world, where one chooses one's freedom. Chapters of The Second Sex were originally published in Les Temps Modernes in June 1949. The second volume came a few months after the first in France. It was very quickly published in America due to the quick translation by Howard Parshall, as prompted by Blanche Knopf, wife of publisher Alfred A. Knopf. Because Parshall had only a basic familiarity with the French language and a minimal understanding of philosophy. He was a professor of biology at Smith College. Much of de Beauvoir's book was mistranslated or inappropriately cut, distorting her intended message. For years, Knopf prevented the introduction of a more accurate retranslation of de Beauvoir's work, declining all proposals despite the efforts of existentialist scholars. Only in 2009 was there a second translation, to mark the 60th anniversary of the original publication. Constance Bord and Sheila Malveny Chevalier produced the first integral translation in 2010, reinstating a third of the original work. In the chapter, Woman, Myth and Reality, of The Second Sex, de Beauvoir argued that men had made women the other in society by application of a false aura of mystery around them. She argued that men used this as an excuse not to understand women or their problems and not to help them, and that this stereotyping was always done in societies by the group higher in the hierarchy to the group lower in the hierarchy. She wrote that a similar kind of oppression by hierarchy also happened in other categories of identity, such as race, class and religion, but she claimed that it was nowhere more true than with gender, in which men stereotyped women and used it as an excuse to organize society into a patriarchy. Women who do not follow the domestic norm are looked down upon in society. Beauvoir is explaining that woman referred as the other. She states, "What is a woman? The fact that I ask it is in itself significant. A man would never get the notion of writing a book on the peculiar situation of the human male. But if I wish to define myself, I must first of all say, I am a woman. On this truth must be based all further discussion. A man never begins by presenting himself as an individual of a certain sex. It goes without saying that he is a man. It would be out of the question to reply, and you think the contrary because you are a man. For it is understood that the fact of being a man is no peculiarity." 34 to 35. As for man, there is no need to define what is to be a man. There is no reason, because they identified themselves as the superior part. Man represents both the positive and the neutral, which doesn't need to be explained or defined, and it is self-explanatory. Thus humanity is male, and man defines woman not in relation to herself but as relative to him. She is not regarded as an autonomous being. 35. Men are the default setting and women are considered a recessive gender. He is the subject. He is the absolute. She is the other. 35. It is like an asymmetrical comparison, but masculine and feminine aren't asymmetrical. Are the woman, really? Most assuredly the theory of the eternal feminine still has its adherents who will whisper in your ear. Even in Russia women are still women. And other erudite persons. Sometimes the very same. Say with a sigh, woman is losing her way. Woman is lost. 34. De Beauvoir refers to the eternal feminine. It can be what defines some kind of spiritual being that connect all women to each other. De Beauvoir argued that women have historically been considered deviant, abnormal. She said that even Mary Wollstonecraft considered men to be the ideal toward which women should aspire. De Beauvoir said that this attitude limited women's success by maintaining the perception that they were a deviation from the normal, and were always outsiders attempting to emulate normality. She believed that for feminism to move forward, this assumption must be set aside. Despite her contributions to the feminist movement, especially the French women's liberation movement, and her beliefs in women's economic independence and equal education, de Beauvoir was initially reluctant to call herself a feminist. However, after observing the resurgence of the feminist movement in the late 1960s and early 1970s, de Beauvoir stated she no longer believed a socialist revolution to be enough to bring about women's liberation. She publicly declared herself a feminist in 1972 in an interview with Le Nouvel Observateur. Part 4, Notable Works. Chapter 5, The Mandarins. Published in 1954, The Mandarins is set after the end of World War II and won her France's highest literary prize, the Prix Goncourt. The book follows the personal lives of philosophers and friends among Sartre's and de Beauvoir's intimate circle, including her relationship with American writer Nelson Algren, to whom the book was dedicated. Algren was outraged by the frank way de Beauvoir described their sexual experiences in both The Mandarins and her autobiographies. Algren vented his outrage when reviewing American translations of de Beauvoir's work. Much material bearing on this episode in de Beauvoir's life, including her love letters to Algren, entered the public domain only after her death. Part 5, Later Years. de Beauvoir wrote popular travel diaries about time spent in the United States and China and published essays and fiction rigorously, especially throughout the 1950s and 1960s. She published several volumes of short stories, including The Woman Destroyed, which, like some of her other later work, deals with aging. 1980 saw the publication of When Things of the Spirit Come First, a set of short stories centered around and based upon women important to her earlier years. Though written long before the novel, she came to stay. De Beauvoir did not at the time consider the stories worth publishing, allowing some 40 years to pass before doing so. Sartre and Merleau-Ponty had a long-standing feud, which led Merleau-Ponty to leave Les Temps Modernes. De Beauvoir sided with Sartre and ceased to associate with Merleau-Ponty. In de Beauvoir's later years, she hosted the journal's editorial meetings in her flat and contributed more than Sartre, whom she often had to force to offer his opinions. De Beauvoir also notably wrote a 4-volume autobiography, consisting of Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter, The Prime of Life, Force of Circumstance, sometimes published in 2 volumes in English translation, After the War and Hard Times, and All Said and Done. In the 1970s, de Beauvoir became active in France's women's liberation movement. She wrote and signed the Manifesto of the 343 in 1971, a manifesto that included a list of famous women who claimed to have had an abortion, then illegal in France. Some argue most of the women had not had abortions, including Beauvoir. Signatories were diverse as Catherine Deneuve, Delphine Seyrig and de Beauvoir's sister Poupette. In 1974, abortion was legalized in France. Her 1970 long essay La Vieillesse, The Coming of Age, is a rare instance of an intellectual meditation on the decline and solitude all humans experience if they do not die before about the age of 60. In an interview with Betty Friedan, de Beauvoir said, "No, we don't believe that any woman should have this choice. No woman should be authorized to stay at home to bring up her children. Society should be totally different. Women should not have that choice, precisely because if there is such a choice, too many women will make that one. It is a way of forcing women in a certain direction." In about 1976, de Beauvoir and Sylvie Le Bon made a trip to New York City in the United States to visit Kate Millett on her farm. In 1981 she wrote La Cérémonie des Addicts, a farewell to Sartre, a painful account of Sartre's last years. In the opening of Addicts, de Beauvoir notes that it is the only major published work of hers which Sartre did not read before its publication. She contributed the piece, Feminism, Alive, Well, and in Constant Danger, to the 1984 anthology, Sisterhood is Global, the International Women's Movement Anthology, edited by Robin Morgan. After Sartre died in 1980, de Beauvoir published his letters to her with edits to spare the feelings of people in their circle who were still living. After de Beauvoir's death, Sartre's adopted daughter and literary heir Alette Elkaim would not let many of Sartre's letters be published in an edited form. Most of Sartre's letters available today have de Beauvoir's edits, which include a few omissions but mostly the use of pseudonyms. De Beauvoir's adopted daughter and literary heir Sylvie Le Bon, unlike Elkaim, published de Beauvoir's unedited letters to both Sartre and Algren. De Beauvoir died of pneumonia on the 14th of April, 1986 in Paris, aged 78. She is buried next to Sartre at the Montparnasse Cemetery in Paris. Part 6, Prizes. Prix Goncourt, 1954. Jerusalem Prize, 1975. Austrian State Prize for European Literature, 1978. Part 7, Works. Part 7, Works. Chapter 1, List of Publications. Non-exhaustive. L'invitee, 1943. English She Came to Stay. Novel. Pyrrhus Asinius. 1944. Non-fiction. Le Sang des Autres S. 1945. English The Blood of Others. Novel. Who Shall Die? 1945. Tous les hommes sont mortels. 1946. English All Men Are Mortal. Novel. Pour une morale de l'ambiguïté. 1947. English The Ethics of Ambiguity. Non-fiction. America Day by Day. 1948. English 1999 Carol Kosman. Translator and Douglas Brinkley. Forward. Non-fiction. Le Doig Siedem Sex. 1949. English The Second Sex. Non-fiction. L'Amérique au jour le jour. 1954. English America Day by Day. Les Mandarins. 1954. English The Mandarins. Novel. Must We Burn Say? 1955. The Long March. 1957. Non-fiction. Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter. 1958. The Prime of Life. 1960. Force of Circumstance. 1963. A Very Easy Death. 1964. Les Belles Images. 1966. Novel. The Woman Destroyed. 1967. Novel. The Coming of Age. 1970. Non-fiction. All Said and Done. 1972. When Things of the Spirit Come First. 1979. Novel. Addicts, A Farewell to Sartre. 1981. Letters to Sartre. 1990. Journal de Guerre, September 1939, January 1941, 1990. English Wartime Diary, 2009. A Transatlantic Love Affair, Letters to Nelson Algren, 1998. Diary of a Philosophy Student, 1926-27, 2006. Cahiers de Joyeuse, 1926-1930, 2008. Part 7, Works. Chapter 2, Selected Translations. Patrick O'Brien was de Beauvoir's principal English translator until he attained commercial success as a novelist. Philosophical Writings. Urbana, University of Illinois Press, 2004, edited by Margaret A. Simons et al. Contains a selection of essays by de Beauvoir translated for the first time into English. Among those are Pyrrhus and Asinius, discussing the futility or utility of action, two previously unpublished chapters from her novel She Came to Stay, and an introduction to Ethics of Ambiguity. Special characters in this article were substituted with audio cues. They were denoted as follows: and, beginning and ending single or double quotations, and, left and right parentheses, a bullet point, an M dash, 3 consecutive periods. This recording is a derivative work from Wikipedia. For more information, to commission recordings like this, and to support the developer, please visit www.patreon.com/frogcast.